Welcome back to DCB's weekly college football recap. It's that time of week again, folks. Thanks once again for joining me here on the podcast as we recap week 11 of college football and look ahead to week 12. Just 3 more weeks of the regular season, plus, of course, Army, Navy. But it is now the month of November, which is bringing a lot more true football weather into the equation. And, of course, one of the great traditions, or at least modern traditions of college football, which is midweek Maction. And that is where we will start our recap for week 11 with a big game in terms of the championship picture in that league. Ohio beats Miami, Ohio 24-20 on Tuesday night in a battle of two contenders. Somewhat controversial ending to this one. Ohio trailed by 3 points midway through the fourth quarter. They got the ball back at their own 25-yard line, and it appeared as if Miami, Ohio had gotten them off the field with a sack on 3rd and 14 at their own 36, but that play turned into a costly face mask penalty, and 2 plays later, Ohio scores on a 49-yard touchdown pass from Parker Navarro. It did also kind of appear that Rodney Harris II, his receiver, may have pushed off to get the separation needed to make the catch, and then just a few more yards to get to the end zone. Miami, Ohio fans will, of course, be hoping that they will get the rematch in the MAC title game. Some work to do to get there, but despite being 5-4, that was their first conference loss, so this one drops them now into a 4-way tie for the lead along with Buffalo and Western Michigan. One team I didn't mention as a part of that group, but as we know, is the most talented team in this league on paper, that's Toledo. They went out and just destroyed NIU 42-3 on Wednesday. They'll be hoping that this is step one towards reestablishing themselves as a contender in this league. They do have 2 conference losses to Bowling Green and Western Michigan, but they're not out of it yet. As we see week after week and year after year in this sport, there's always chaotic results, especially down the stretch. There's pressure on these teams that are in contention positions, especially if they're not used to being there. Toledo is there year after year, and they'll be a solid favorite probably in all 3 of their remaining games. But they haven't always been the best at taking care of business in those spots under Jason Candle. It's a stat that we've mentioned multiple times on this podcast, but 17 times over the past 4 seasons, he's been a favorite and outright lost. 10 of those were in a position as a double-digit favorite, so you never really can truly trust this team, although that was a great spot for them on Wednesday. They've been exchanging wins and losses week after week throughout the season, and that's why they're just 5-4. Need to catch this momentum and carry it throughout the rest of the season to have a chance. A notable result in the American Conference on Thursday night was South Florida taking care of business against UTSA 55-23. This game was 14-0 before the Bulls touched the ball on offense. 2 defensive scores, a pick 6 on the very first play, and then a fumble return after UTSA had worked it down the field for nearly 8 minutes of total possession. UTSA had 4 possessions in the first quarter to South Florida's 1, and yet it was 21-3 USF at that point. I can't imagine how hard that must have been on UTSA to try to respond mentally. They did, to their credit, then go out and score a touchdown, but their defense unable to get any stops against that high-powered USF offense. They only held the ball for about 19 minutes in this one, but still put up 469 total yards. Byron Brown continues to be one of the most electric players in the group of 5, and he's obviously hoping to lead his team to a playoff appearance. It's looking more and more likely like USF will indeed be a part of the American title picture, but once again, there's a logjam at the top of this league with 5 teams tied with just 1 in the loss column. Friday gave us a pretty exciting 3-game slate, a nice reversal from the previous week. 3 games all went solidly over their total. Houston and UCF. We'll start there. A big win once again for Houston. They've been great in close games this season. The two offenses actually started slow in this one, but combined for 6 scoring drives in the second quarter to blow this thing open. Connor Wigman, the Houston quarterback, ended up throwing 3 interceptions in this game, but the UCF passing attack struggled even more, which allowed Houston to really clamp down defensively in the second half. It was a weird result in terms of purely looking at it from a totals perspective, as 38 of the 57 points were scored in that second quarter, and Houston defensively really looked great outside of about 5 or 6 minutes of game time. But sometimes that's all you need to get to an over in college football. So, what looked like a shootout on paper really was a bit of a struggle statistically for both offenses. Houston moves to 8-2 and keeps their slim playoff hopes alive. Another huge result in the American on Friday night was Tulane beating Memphis on the road outright as an underdog. This line was jumping around all week, with Memphis nearly a touchdown favorite early in the week, and then it started to move down as there was doubts once again that Brendan Lewis, their quarterback, would play. He did end up suiting up and played a fantastic game, but their defense couldn't get a single stop in the first half as Tulane had 35 points by halftime. That was all they needed, kind of slowed the game down in the second half and just solidified the win. I still have some doubts about Tulane, but this loss for Memphis may actually knock them out of the AAC title picture. Even at 8-2, there are currently 5 teams with just 1 loss in the American, as I said. So Memphis certainly does not control their destiny any longer. They need a lot of help to get back in the picture. And the third and final game of Friday night was in the Big Ten, a late night kickoff at USC. Northwestern traveling across the country, and ultimately their offense not able to keep up with USC here. They did for a while, as it was just 21-14 heading into the half. Had a chance to hold USC to a field goal on their final drive of the first half, and that might have helped them stay in the game longer. But really, the story in this one, in my opinion, is USC finding themselves a new running back. This has been as a result of some injuries to the 2 guys that were starting at the beginning of the season, but freshman King Miller now has over 600 yards in just 4 starts. He did contribute some early in the season as well, but has now taken over as RB1, 127 yards and a touchdown here, adding to what has been a really balanced offense for USC all season, but the run game was becoming a question mark with all the injuries stacking up at least. However, this offense remains extremely potent, and they've got 2 more big ranked matchups to go against Iowa and then on the road at Oregon. Moving over to Saturday, let's begin with Indiana surviving a scare on the road at what is now a 3-6 Penn State team. We know this is a top 10 to 15 roster in the sport. They've just obviously had a lot of turmoil this year with losing the coach, losing the quarterback. However, Ethan Grunkemeyer actually looked very solid in his first home start. Couldn't ask for a much tougher start to your career if you're that kid. Back-to-back road starts at Iowa and at Ohio State before facing the number 2 team in the nation at home. He held his own, and so did Penn State for most of the game. They did fall behind by 10 points right before the half, and it felt to me like that was the end of it, as I didn't think the offense would have enough explosion to catch up from down multiple possessions. And yet they did. 2 fourth-quarter touchdowns gave Penn State the lead until Fernando Mendoza in Indiana once again went down the field for a game-winning drive. Incredible throw and incredible catch by Omar Cooper in the back of the end zone. That one may have been good in the league, and it gave IU the permanent lead with 36 seconds remaining to escape with a narrow win in Happy Valley. The other top team in the Big Ten had a little easier game of it at Purdue. They did trail 3-0 after the first quarter, but truly nobody was concerned about Ohio State. They won 34-10. If you were betting this one, it was a pretty bad beat for you if you had the Buckeyes. They were a 30.5 point favorite, and Purdue scored a touchdown with 145 remaining to cover that number. So unlucky there, but still no concerns really for Ohio State. The defense remains dominant. Julian Sayin did throw an interception in this game, but remains one of the Heisman co-favorites. Over in the Big 12, we were supposed to have a competitive top 10 matchup between BYU and Texas Tech. I've been screaming from the rooftops for feels like 2 years now that this BYU football program has been overrated, and they have continued to prove me wrong time and time again, just winning games that they technically weren't supposed to in seemingly impossible ways. In this one, they absolutely never stood a chance. Texas Tech won 29-7, and it really didn't feel that close, even with a 22-point margin. Texas Tech was pretty inefficient on offense. They were unable to get into the end zone on most of their drives, had to settle for a total of 5 field goals in this one. I thought Bear Bachmeier, the freshman quarterback for BYU, was actually relatively composed in a tough road environment here. However, their run game was completely unable to get going. LJ Martin, one of the best backs in the league, only had 10 carries. Bachmeier himself, 11 carries for 12 yards. Texas Tech's defensive line continues to be one of the most dominant individual units in the country and probably the best unit in the Big 12. They took over this game, just shut down the BYU rushing attack, and course, got some pressure on Bachmeier. Even with just 2 sacks, they definitely affected him a few more times than that. Got to give BYU's red zone defense some credit as well. As I said, they clamped down and held to 5 field goals. They just were not able to get enough push themselves up front. So a dominant home win here for Texas Tech. They are the runaway favorites to win the Big 12 at this point, and the biggest question remains, most likely, what will their seed be? Another early matchup in the Big 12 was between Colorado and West Virginia, two teams that have not been great this season, but West Virginia is definitely starting to turn things around. I thought it would not happen until year 2 under Rich Rodriguez, as year 1, he typically comes in and just blows things up until he can get it to go the way that he wants it run. But back-to-back wins now in the Big 12, on the road at Houston last week, and now against a Colorado team that had been playing a little bit better. They found a pretty exciting freshman quarterback in Scotty Fox Jr. He did throw 2 interceptions in this game, but used his legs effectively alongside the other freshman that they've been rocking with, their running back Dior Hubbard. Those two made just enough plays in this one to hold off Colorado's comeback attempt. It felt like West Virginia was mostly in control throughout, but a 7-point margin in the end. SMU went on the road to Boston College for their red bandana game, which is usually a spot where BC gets up and plays very well. However, SMU looks like a changed team ever since the Wake Forest loss. They obviously beat Miami a week ago, and now a 45-13 thumping. Kevin Jennings played great. They had the run game rolling. SMU just dominant from start to finish. They forced turnovers on defense as they typically do. 4 of them in this one from BC as they dropped to 1-9. The project doesn't seem to be going too well for Bill O'Brien over there, but SMU is technically still a part of the ACC title picture, only 1 conference loss. Sometimes we forget that as a 7-3 team, but they've got close losses out of conference to Baylor and TCU, those rivalry games in the state of Texas. I don't see them having any chance of getting in as an at-large this season, so they better win the conference, but the schedule now looks more manageable with Louisville at home in 2 weeks off of a bye. And that really leads me into my next segment here, which is an overall look at the landscape of the ACC. What an embarrassing weekend for the conference overall. Almost all of its top contenders went out there and embarrassed themselves. Louisville, as I just mentioned, the reason why that game looks a little bit easier now is because despite Louisville having that big win on the road at Miami Friday night a couple weeks ago, they went out there as a 19-point home favorite against Cal and lost outright. Everything was in front of this team. They had a very favorable schedule on paper to finish 11-1, and regardless of whether they made the ACC title game or not, that would have given them a decent chance of making it into the field. However, this loss throws a major wrench into things. Cal, got to give them some credit. We've talked about their freshman quarterback, Sangapolu, but he played great in this one, arguably a career breakout performance, but also for his top receiver, Jacob DeJesus. This kid is just 5'7", 170, but he had 16 catches in this one for 158 yards and a touchdown. 23 targets is absolutely ridiculous. But Cal had a game plan, clearly, target their number one guy over and over again, and eventually it works. He scores the game winner in overtime after their defense held Louisville to a long field goal attempt on their first possession of OT. Just a tough look for the Cardinals, and once again, Jeff Brom becoming a developing story. Overall, I feel like he's doing a great job of developing players there at Louisville, but this is a number of years now where they've had a great opportunity to make some noise and maybe even be a playoff team, but they've lost critical games against inferior competition where they've been a solid favorite. So once again, similar story here for Louisville, and just the first of several embarrassments for the ACC this weekend. The second was Virginia going out and losing at home to Wake Forest, a respectable team this season, I suppose you could say, but Virginia just 9 points on offense in this one. Just a disaster showing. They did not make it into the end zone. Their quarterback, Chandler Morris, was knocked out of this one pretty early with a concussion. And although I was unable to watch this one, I saw some of their fans online discussing the hit that knocked him out of the game. Supposedly some helmet-to-helmet going on, but either way, huge loss for them at the quarterback position. The backup was very inefficient, and clearly that offense very reliant on Morris, although we know this Virginia team has been scraping by week after week. We've discussed it. They've won 3 games in overtime, got very fortunate to cover on the road at Cal last week. So a loss was always coming. I thought maybe it would take another week before we saw it. We'll discuss their upcoming game this weekend in a bit. But how about Wake Forest? 6-3 now and bowl eligible in year one under head coach Jake Dickert, who they hired away from Washington State. He's a defensive guy. Their defense has really carried them in a lot of their biggest wins. Obviously here, winning 16-9, the 13-12 win over SMU. It hasn't always been pretty offensively. They've trotted out 2 different quarterbacks. Even in this game, Deshaun Purdy didn't play a ton, but he did throw 7 passes. I am excited to see what this program can do when they get some real talent in there on the offensive side of the ball. And third, but certainly not least, yes, I was not moving on from this without mentioning Duke. Technically, once again, this team is still alive to win the ACC, and if they win the ACC, do they then get a playoff spot with 4 losses? This Duke team now has 3 of them out of conference, just 1 in the league to Georgia Tech, no shame in that. But in addition to earlier losses to Illinois and Tulane, they picked up another one here at UConn. 37-34 the final. Their offense did fine, although once again the Achilles heel for them remains turnovers, 3 more of them, 2 interceptions by Mensa and a fumble. UConn's offense has quietly been one of the best in the country. They're 7-3 on the season, and their quarterback's stat line is absolutely incredible. He has 25 touchdown passes and 0 interceptions through 10 games. Just because he plays at a small school like UConn doesn't mean he doesn't deserve some Heisman love, so let's get him in the conversation. A couple of top SEC teams continued to roll in the early hour as well, with Georgia and Ole Miss picking up straightforward wins. Ole Miss, I'm not going to talk about. They beat the Citadel 49-0. Congratulations. Georgia, though, went on the road to Mississippi State and won by 20 points, 41-21. That's something that not many teams have been able to do to Mississippi State this season. They came into this one 8-1 against the spread, obviously failed to cover here as just a 9.5 point dog. Blake Shapen, their quarterback, has been banged up a little bit throughout SEC play. They have really struggled to protect him, and that resulted in freshman Kamario Taylor getting a lot more snaps in this one. He clearly has a ton of potential for them, a bright future, no doubt. He did struggle a little bit in the pass game in this one, but he ran 3 touchdowns in. We'll see what the quarterback picture looks like moving forward for this team. They're 5-5 with 2 ranked teams remaining, a road test at Missouri, and then a bye week before the Egg Bowl. So very interesting there. That one will be played at home in Starkville. So Mississippi State could have bowl eligibility on the line in the final week, with also a chance to knock Ole Miss out of the SEC title game, depending on tiebreakers. Georgia, I should also say, looked very impressive offensively in this game. I thought it was arguably Gunnar Stockton's best performance of the season. Also, Nate Frazier can say the same thing for him, the running back. 12 carries for 181 and a touchdown. Ripped off some explosive ones. The whole team did. Zachariah Branch continues to be a major problem for defenses to deal with. Just a big-time playmaker at the receiver spot, a guy that would not be on this roster in a previous era, but they're very thankful to have gotten him from USC. Georgia's got a huge one to look forward to now this week at home against Texas. A notable group of 5 result from early in the day was James Madison continuing to keep their playoff bid alive. This is part of the reason why I say the ACC may not be a lock for the playoffs. The rules are the top 5 conference champions in terms of their rankings get into the field, but what if James Madison and the American Conference title winner are both ranked and a 9-4 Duke team is unranked? You could feasibly see 2 group of 5 teams in the playoffs. I would personally love to see that. I'm sure the ACC will have some lawyers on standby if that situation is to occur, but F it, let's have some fun. Let's get James Madison and either North Texas or South Florida both in there. As far as the game itself, Marshall did present a bit of a challenge for them. They put up 23 points against a very good defense for the season. Marshall's had a pretty good quarterback so far. Carlos Del Rio Wilson having a good season. James Madison continues to be so balanced offensively, though, and just did enough to get a road win and keep those hopes alive. And on the other side of the Sun Belt standings, there are divisions in this league, the only league remaining to have divisions. Southern Miss atop the West Division, and they continue to be with another big road win for them as well over Arkansas State, 27-21. Braylon Braxton, their quarterback, who they took from Marshall, has been incredibly consistent this season. He's thrown for 200 plus in 8 of their 9 games. Southern Miss moves to 7-2 a year after being one of the worst programs in the country. One game that I'll quickly note that kicked off at 2:30 Eastern Time in the Big Ten, and the only reason I'm mentioning this is because of our future bet on this team. If you listen to the offseason preview, you know that I liked Rutgers quite a bit coming into the season. Obviously hasn't worked out entirely as planned, but Rutgers picks up a big home win in what was essentially a coin flip spot against Maryland. 35-20, they move to 5-5. We need one more for the win total and for them to get to bowl eligibility. They play Penn State at home in their final matchup. That will probably decide whether they hit that number. The much more notable game in the midday slate in the Big Ten was Oregon clutching up and kicking a game-winning field goal to walk it off in Kinnick Stadium, 18-16 against Iowa. This was exactly what you would expect a game at Kinnick Stadium to be a kind of a welcome to the Big Ten moment for Oregon if Iowa had been able to pull this off. They made it into their type of game, gritty, defensive, low scoring, and they took the lead with a clutch touchdown just under 2 minutes remaining. A rushing score by Mark Gronowski, his 12th of the season. He's been an impactful quarterback for them, even if he hasn't put up great numbers through the air. He barely has 1,000 passing yards through 9 games, but the element of him using his legs has been very effective for them. Their defense is obviously always going to be good, but Oregon struggled for most of the game in the conditions. It was very cold and rainy there, but got to give them a ton of credit. They are a very well coached team under Dan Lanning. They executed perfectly on the final drive, set up for their kicker to have a reasonable attempt at 39 yards. A lot of times you see these teams in the 2-minute situation, they settle for a mid 40s to even in the 50-yard attempt for their field goal kicker. And in college, you just can't trust those guys to be that consistent from that distance. So credit to Lanning and his staff, and obviously the players for executing what they needed to get done. Got down to the 22. Oregon knocks it in and stays alive for a playoff spot. They've got 2 more big games still on the schedule, with USC and a road trip to Washington to end it. And in the SEC, Texas A&M continues to roll. They are now 9-0, a big, really dominant win at Missouri. Their defense shut the Tigers out in the first half, led 21-0 early in the third, and really never looked back. This team can do it all. Marcel Reed is playing well at quarterback. They've got 2 very good running backs. They've got 2 explosive receivers. The pass rush is dominant. There's really not much to dislike about this Aggie team. All eyes on their regular season finale at this point versus Texas. That will probably decide if they hang on to their spot in the SEC title game. It is looking more and more likely with each passing week. And another big result in the SEC was Vanderbilt, another team staying alive for playoff contention. The number 16 team in the nation came back to beat Auburn in overtime at home. Diego Pavia just owns Auburn University. This was the first game for Auburn after firing Hugh Freeze, and the offense looked completely different than it has all season. Maybe the play calling truly was the problem. They started off by going 99 yards in the first quarter in 13 plays for a great touchdown to open the scoring. They appear to be committing to Ashton Daniels for the remainder of the season as he threw for 353 yards in this one. I did see some Auburn fans saying that they need to sit him so he can redshirt and return next year, but he is a senior and they've got a young guy behind him that I think they're excited about. I'm not sure we're going to see too much more of Jackson Arnold, but regardless, the stars of the show in this one were the Auburn receivers, Cam Coleman and Eric Singleton, each with 100 yards and a score. On the other side, Diego Pavia, as I said, he just does what it takes to win, especially against Auburn. Now 3-0, 2-0 at Vandy, and also beat him when he was at New Mexico State. He ran for over 100 yards and a touchdown in this one, along with 377 and 3 scores through the air. Just a ridiculous stat line. As we say every week, Vandy can score on everyone. They started slow, had to come back, but they never lost belief in themselves, and they remain a huge part of the playoff picture. If they win out, it's going to be very difficult to keep them out as a 10-2 SEC at-large team. One team that did ruin their playoff chances was Washington, going on the road and once again struggling. This team just cannot go east and win games. They escaped with a close one at Maryland earlier this year, and that's the only time they've been able to get it done. Trailed 20-0 in that one, and this time they couldn't even beat Wisconsin. 13-10, the Badgers win it, and Wisconsin really didn't do anything on offense in this game. There were 2 touchdown drives by the 2 teams combined, and those 2 drives were a total of 8 yards. Washington, 2 plays, 1 yard for a score, and then Wisconsin 2 plays, 7 yards for a score. Both of them came off of turnovers. Washington scored theirs off of a blocked punt, and then Wisconsin recovered a fumble deep in Washington territory. Just a very ugly game all around. There were blocked field goals, just a lot of chaos and mayhem all throughout the game. Wisconsin was stopped on downs in the red zone multiple times in the first quarter. Still came away with a win. I thought it was very interesting that prior to the game, their athletic department came out and reaffirmed that head coach Luke Fickell will return next season. They seem to believe that the bigger problem was the rest of the staff, the coordinators, and possibly the position coaches. I don't know. I haven't dug that deep into it. But either way, Fickell, a vote of confidence despite a 2-6 record going into that one. Now 3-6, some life for Wisconsin. Maybe something to point to as momentum building for next year as they desperately need to recruit in the transfer portal this upcoming offseason. Another couple of ACC matchups that were really just low quality football. This conference continues to degrade in quality. North Carolina somehow is still alive to make a bowl game. They moved to 4-5 with a close win over Stanford, 20-15. Really gross game. They put up barely 270 yards of offense. Stanford gave Elijah Brown, the freshman quarterback, his second start of the season, and he did throw for a decent amount of yardage, but had a key turnover, and they were completely shut down in the run game. Clemson broke their home losing streak off at 6, finally beat Florida State here in this one, another team that has really struggled in the ACC. It's just remarkable that a place called Death Valley could have a 6-game losing streak in it for the home team, but good for Clemson to win one finally. One of these teams is going to make a bowl, the other one might not. Both now 4-5 after this result. Notre Dame continues to look like a fearsome team on both sides of the ball. They went out and shellacked Navy 49-10. Another one of those teams that is competing for a chance at the American title game and a potential playoff spot. But Notre Dame just dominated from start to finish. Navy never had a chance. This is a matchup that continues to get more and more lopsided every year, it seems like, as Notre Dame stockpiles talent in this new era and Navy struggles to keep up a little bit despite their success in their own conference. Notre Dame really struggled defensively the first few weeks, but now that they can stop the run and they've gotten some guys back injured in the secondary, this feels like a very complete team. They will need to win on the road at Pittsburgh this week. That's probably their toughest test remaining. But if they finish 10-2, they'll be in the playoffs, and they'll be a very dangerous matchup for whoever they face. One more SEC matchup to note in the night slate was Alabama. A pretty gross win, but a win nonetheless against LSU, 20-9. They really could not get their run game going whatsoever. Credit to that LSU defense for bouncing back after the way they were embarrassed at home by Texas A&M. Had a great chance to, at the minimum, cover the spread in this game, cut it to 17-9 in the fourth quarter. Had plenty of opportunities down just one possession to try and tie things up and pull out a big road win. Frank Wilson, the interim coach, unfortunately just unable to unlock the offense for this team. It's been the issue all season. A ton of talent across this LSU roster, but now without Brian Kelly, a very uncertain future for the rest of their season. Maybe I should have said 2 SEC games because as much as I don't want to mention this one, I probably should. My Florida Gators, what an embarrassing performance on the road at Kentucky. I think I mentioned last week that this was a tough spot for Florida. They were coming off of the emotional rivalry loss on a neutral field against Georgia, where they really left everything out there and fought hard. They've got a couple more rivalry matchups to look forward to at the very end of the season, but until then, I don't know if this team is really going to be getting up for games like this, and it really showed. Kentucky just thrashed them 38-7. They got some explosive runs, but really it was the defense picking off DJ Lagway 3 more times. That's 12 on the season now for him. It's been a real struggle in the development of the young QB. Obviously, very talented player, but he's going to need a new staff next year to hopefully coach him in the right direction. I believe he will be a Florida Gator this time next year, but it all depends who the coaching hire is, whether this team will be different in 2026. Nebraska with a nice rebound win on the road at UCLA and an impressive debut for their new starting quarterback, TJ Lateef. Dylan Raiola out for the season, and Lateef took full advantage of his opportunity. He wasn't asked to do a ton, only threw 15 passes in this one, but Nebraska took control early in this game with some explosive plays, and they really never looked back. Talent advantage was clear here, and Nebraska now moves to 7-3. Even though they've had some disappointing losses this year, it's clear that this program is finally moving in the right direction under Matt Rule. They've had such an issue closing out one possession games in the past, but yet again, here we go, a 7-point win at UCLA. That is their fourth one possession win of the season. Great job by Rule and his staff, and bright future for this program. Couple of late night games that I'll touch on, and then we'll move ahead to the Week 12 preview. These games were still on your TV when it was technically Sunday morning. One of those was Sam Houston, a previously winless team, going to Oregon State, another team that has had a disaster season. Sam Houston wins this one 21-17, and I truly cannot believe it looking at the box score. I saw a few clips from this game. I didn't watch it in its entirety. Oregon State had an opportunity to score and take the lead on their last possession, a 4th and 3 inside the Sam Houston 15-yard line, and the tight end just dropped the ball wide open in the flat, could have walked into the end zone to take the lead. Stunningly bad football between these two teams. Oregon State actually held a 17-0 lead in this game as well, and Sam Houston was able to make the comeback on the road despite putting up just 157 total yards of offense, outgained by more than 300 yards, a 28-8 first down advantage for Oregon State. I just have no idea how they lost this game. Ridiculous result here all around. And the other late night game, this one actually did kick off, I believe, technically on Sunday morning, and that was Hawaii on the island. A huge upset win against San Diego State. They win it 38-6. San Diego State previously undefeated in conference. They were 7-1 going into this game, with their only loss to Washington State, a non-conference matchup, and yet only able to put up 6 points on the road against a Hawaii defense that has really struggled. Got to give some credit to Micah Alejado. He's been one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the group of 5 all season. He's very fun to watch, very good at extending plays, even though he's been banged up throughout the season, and really works the pocket well, even standing just 5'10". I thought this could be a bit of a tricky spot for San Diego State, but never would have imagined a 38-6 loss. Time to shift our focus forward now to Week 12. This is going to be an extremely important week in terms of postseason ramifications and finally starting to get some separation at the top of some of these leagues. Most leagues currently have a logjam with a bunch of one-loss teams tied at the top. There's a lot of chances, though, for those teams to face off against each other. So let's get into all of the biggest games upcoming in Week 12. Of course, we've got to start with Maction, where I believe there are 3 games this week that will really play a big role in deciding who wins this conference. The first one is on Tuesday night. Ohio travels to Western Michigan. We talked about their game earlier. They got a little lucky to beat Miami, Ohio. I don't think they're going to be as fortunate here. Western Michigan has been a great home team all season, and under Lance Taylor in general, Their only home loss was back in week 2 by 3 points in overtime to a playoff contender in North Texas. They beat Toledo outright, and some of these results were before it started to get cold up here. So it's only expected to be about 35 degrees at kickoff here. I think Western Michigan's defense is better, so maybe a better weather spot. I would take Parker Navarro and the road Bobcats, but I'm leaning towards the home dog. Just getting 1.5 points on the spread here, but give me Western Michigan on Tuesday night. And the other two are on Wednesday, also with pretty short numbers. I did say earlier that Toledo would likely be favored in all of their remaining games. They go on the road to Miami, Ohio, the team that is currently atop the standings, part of the tie with one conference loss. But Toledo is a 3.5 point favorite on the road. So not only are they giving you Miami, Ohio with the field goal, but also the hook, that tells me that Toledo is likely to win this game and probably pretty comfortably. They do have a very solid talent advantage in this one and really against every team in this conference. The games that I get more concerned about for Toledo are when they're about a 10 to 14 or even bigger point favorite against some of the lower ranked teams in the conference. I think they will be fully focused for this matchup. Give me the Rockets in this one on the road. And then the game I'm having the hardest time figuring out to this point is Buffalo and Central Michigan. Buffalo currently a 2.5 point underdog at CMU. I really had not been impressed with this team all season, but then this past weekend they went to Bowling Green and won 28-3. That was a Week 10 result, but Buffalo maybe started to find some offense in that one, and we know the defense can play well. CMU has not had a lot of production offensively all season, and I wonder if they can do much against a very good defense. However, the fact that they're a favorite at home here is interesting. I will have to dig into this one more. Definitely not as confident on either side as I am for the other two games. There is one game in the Sun Belt on Thursday night. This one has a double-digit spread between Old Dominion hosting Troy. They're an 11.5 point favorite. That does surprise me, with Troy at 6-3 and in second place in their division in the Sun Belt. They are coming off of a rough loss at home to Arkansas State. Very interesting line on this spread. One key game on Friday night is Louisville, a team that likely blew their chance at a playoff spot this past weekend. They are now just a 3 point favorite at home against Clemson, a team that we know has struggled from the start but was the preseason favorites to win this conference. Clemson has more talent on paper, and the books are essentially telling you that where these two teams are right now, it's a pick 'em on a neutral field, even with all the struggles that Clemson has had. So another line that is very, very interesting. Just something that you generally have to keep in mind when you're looking at these lines, keeping them in perspective to where these teams are and accounting for the neutral field and accounting for the bump that home field teams get, usually 2.5 to 3.5 points, depending on the level of environment. Oregon also plays on Friday night, but they are about a 24 point favorite against Minnesota. They should take care of business, although they could be caught looking ahead to USC. That would be really the only argument I could make for the Gophers. As we look ahead to Saturday, probably the biggest thing that stands out to me is how many big numbers are out there. It really seems like, in general, this could be a week where the contenders separate themselves from the rest of the field and dominate, although we just had one of those weekends where nearly all of the big favorites won and covered. This feels a little deceptive to me. I think we're going to see a handful of these double-digit dogs win outright. Our job is to find out which ones are in the best spot to do so. So let's get into it. One that I'll start us off with, and I'm not calling for a direct outright upset here, but I will put it on caution watch, and that's Michigan going to Northwestern. They're about an 11.5 point favorite. Northwestern's been a feisty team all year, though. Michigan has really struggled offensively when they've hit the road. This does feel like the low point to kind of buy in with Northwestern. They had won 4 straight games before back-to-back road losses at Nebraska and USC, but they led Nebraska in the second half in that game. I still think this is a capable roster, especially defensively. Expect Michigan to struggle on offense once again. The play calling just gets so conservative when they go on the road. The offensive line tends to struggle protecting Bryce Underwood, and he has been a little bit inaccurate the last couple of weeks as well. So we'll obviously be rooting for my boys in blue, and hopefully they can go out and just take care of business. But this is the first of 2 tricky road tests before the Ohio State game. People always tend to overlook these games because you're already looking ahead to the game. I would not do so here, though. Northwestern will likely make this a competitive game, and if they can keep it low scoring, I think they'll be right there in the fourth quarter. Another one that I could potentially see happening, although there is a pretty wide talent gap on paper, that's Notre Dame traveling to Pittsburgh. Very interesting matchup. As we talked about earlier with Notre Dame, they've been extremely dominant for most of the season now, ever since they lost their first 2 games of the year. Pittsburgh, though, has also won 5 straight games, and it coincided with when they made their quarterback change to the freshman Mason Heinchel. He's been incredible. They're also coming into this one off of a bye. I do worry about Pitt being able to hold up in the trenches here, and that is why you see Notre Dame as a 10.5-point favorite on the road. Line actually opened up at 12.5, so it has come down just a little bit here in the early market moves. However, Pitt is clearly going to need some help to be able to win this one outright. They're going to need to force a turnover or 2, and they're going to need Heinchel to continue playing out of his mind. I think this will be the toughest defense that he's faced so far. We'll see if he can find any of the vulnerabilities that Notre Dame's secondary showed in the first 2 weeks. Another early game that is catching my eye is South Florida traveling to Navy. Now, I think Navy was a little bit overrated at 7-0. They had played an extremely soft schedule. They had actually struggled against some of those teams as well. And now they've lost back-to-back games, both on the road at North Texas and then at Notre Dame. I feel like most people are probably going to be out on them after that, but they still run a very difficult offense to prepare for with the option. The USF ground defense hasn't been great this season. It's one of their weaknesses. I do think Navy could potentially give them a real fight here. South Florida will be fully focused here. I'm sure it is their biggest game remaining. They're trying to finish out 10-2 and make it to the American Conference title game. But Navy is right there as well with 1 conference loss. So currently leaning toward the home dog there, also getting 10.5 points. There are some heavyweight matchups in the 3:30 slot, 3 games with spreads just under a touchdown. We'll start with the ACC matchup. I kind of alluded to this one earlier. 2 teams that completely embarrassed themselves this weekend, Virginia and Duke. I was really hoping that Virginia beat Wake Forest this weekend so that I could fade them even harder than I probably will. Already in this spot with Duke, they are favored by 6.5 points at home. A team that has been very difficult to trust because of how many mistakes they make, how many turnovers that offense has. But outside of the turnovers, they're so explosive and they're so balanced. Their passing attack, their run game, both been excellent this season. I do feel like this is a Duke blowout spot, but we will see where this number goes before Saturday. In the Big Ten, we have Iowa hitting the road to take on USC. I don't think their offense is going to be able to keep up in this one, similar to what we just saw with Northwestern going out there. Obviously, Iowa's defense probably a little bit better than Northwestern, and they're certainly better at the line of scrimmage. Maybe can establish the run game well enough, but the passing attack for USC has been so good this year, and as good as Iowa can be taking the ball away at home, they don't do it as often on the road. I think this will probably be a fairly comfortable result for USC, but nothing is guaranteed when you have to play Iowa's style of ball, so we'll see if they can make USC adjust to their way of playing. And in the SEC, we have Oklahoma hitting the road to take on Alabama. massive revenge spot for the Tide after last year really got embarrassed against a bad OU team. Oklahoma ruined their chance of going to the playoff. They ended up being the first team out of the field, and that loss late in the season was the biggest reason for it. So Alabama going to be fully focused here. I expect it to be similar to the Vanderbilt game. Maybe they won't blow them out from the start, but I do expect them to pull away here in the end. So give me another home favorite here with Alabama. I will lay the 6.5 points, just under a touchdown. And one more home favorite that I'll mention before we go into a couple of night games and close this podcast out for the week. East Carolina, surprisingly, a 3-point favorite against Memphis. I mentioned Memphis earlier as a team that I just wonder if they're going to have the motivation moving forward now. They've got 2 really tough games remaining, and they just picked up their second conference loss, which currently puts them at 6th place in the conference standings. They could potentially get back up to the top if they win both and get a lot of help, but I'm not sure that's going to be the full focus here. I think ECU is the better side. They've been a little bit up and down, but really when you look at their 3 losses, there's no shame in any of them. The only conference loss was by 7 points on the road at Tulane. They lost to BYU and NC State out of conference. So ECU, 40-plus points on offense in 3 straight games. They've been finding their stride with the tempo. I think they get another home win here against the Tigers. Probably won't be a popular pick. I'm hoping it won't be because I love to fade a popular underdog. There are 2 games that will be receiving most of my attention on Saturday night, and they're both in the SEC. I'm excited almost equally for both of them. That might be a lie. The second one is pretty darn great. But this one, we've got Mississippi State going to Missouri, and they're just a 6.5 point favorite on the road. The books are finally showing some respect to Mississippi State. Obviously, it's hard to gauge how good this Missouri offense is right now with their third string quarterback out there. Really struggled against Texas A&M after I thought he looked pretty capable in relief duty the week before. The Bulldogs, though, 8-2 against the spread. They've been great at covering numbers, been one of the most undervalued teams all season. I think they continue that. They are hungry to make it to a bowl. Missouri is a team with not much to play for themselves in this spot. They've got some big rivalry games to look forward to in the weeks following. I think this could be a Mississippi State outright spot, even on the road in Columbia. And the biggest game, the main event, one of the biggest games of the season, I would argue, Texas hitting the road to take on Georgia. This is a matchup that we saw twice a year ago, once in Austin and once in Atlanta. Texas was favored in both of those games, and they lost both of them. Georgia really was not a disruptive defense all season in 2024, and yet their 2 most disruptive games were both against Texas. So Kirby Smart somehow got them fired up for that matchup and really took over that game against Texas both times, dominated their offensive line, and made the former quarterback Quinn Ewers really struggle. Arch Manning has struggled for most of the season for Texas as well. But the last 2 games, I've seen some things out of that offense that I've been very impressed with. Put up 34 points in 3 quarters in a win against Vanderbilt after putting up 45 on the road at Mississippi State the week prior. The offensive line is starting to play better, and as I said, big revenge spot for them personally. I think this is a game where they will have a major chip on their shoulder. I look for Texas to play one of their better games of the year. Georgia has been vulnerable at home this season, something that we're not used to saying. They finally broke the long winning streak back in week 4 with the loss to Alabama. Nearly lost to Ole Miss as well. Had to come back to win that one. I've got Texas possibly winning this game outright. SEC underdogs have been great to me all year. This past week, almost every favorite won and covered. I think we get back to the trend here. Give me the Longhorns. And as I posted earlier last week, if you want to get in on some playoff bets, I would jump in on Texas right now and potentially even fade Georgia. If they lose this one and Georgia Tech, that would put them out. So tough scenario there, but regardless, worth the value shots in my opinion. That'll do it for the quick rundown of the Week 12 board. There are plenty more games to discuss, and if you want a more thorough breakdown and analysis of all of the biggest games, be sure to join us over on Twitter live on Spaces 10 a.m. Eastern Time every Saturday. We are also getting into college basketball season. The first week just wrapped up, and we did a number of spaces for that sport as well. So keep an eye out for those. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at DailyCFBCBB. Appreciate everybody for tuning in today, but until next time, have a great rest of your day.